Hi, I'm Eric Lubau, and welcome to Beyond the Belt. This is a conversation with Kurt Wuckert Jr., a black belt out of Florida, USA. Kurt is a Bitcoin and blockchain historian, media personality, podcaster, husband, and father. He's also the owner of GorillaPool.com, a Bitcoin mining firm, and he's the host of the CoinGeek weekly livestream. I hope you enjoy our chat. All right. Thanks for being here. What was it like for you to get your black belt?
Surreal. So I had trained for over 13 years at that point, pushing 14 years. And I knew there was a graduation ceremony because the gym I'm at now does them every 6 months. And so I knew when it was. And I actually had the worst gym accident of my life about 3 days before the graduation. So I had a massive hernia opened up just above my belly button. So it's not your typical bodybuilder belly button, but I was doing chest flies at Planet Fitness and something tore. It sounded like my t-shirt tore, but it felt like somebody stabbed me in the lung. And so I ended up in the emergency room having surgery and the whole thing. It was a major event for my life. And then, I get out and I'm like, I never miss the team stuff. Like I go to every seminar. I've just always been that guy. Like I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there to support the team, even if, I'm not going to do much. So it's like, you know what? I'm going. And so I am like barely able to walk because I can't engage my core. And so I'm like,
were you on crutches or anything, or with like a cane or something cool at least?
So I'm trying to think now. I had two surgeries within 3 months of each other, and I don't remember. Now I think I was able to walk, but I was walking like a 90-year-old. Yeah. So I'm doing like shuffle steps and that kind of thing. My wife is a brown belt also. She's like holding me. It was like, it's not by myself walking in, but I get there and everyone's a little bit like, oh my God, Kurt's here. What, are you okay? It's like, yeah, I'm fine. Like I'm going to sit. I need a chair, but I'm going to be on the mats with you guys. And so we get through, I'm clapping for everybody, like, blue belts, people get their stripes, a couple of purple belts, a couple of brown belts, and like we get into the black belts and like no surprise. And they're like, Kurt, come on up, and I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me, And so I'm like getting out of my, like, okay, I'm getting up. And like my coach is afraid to tie the belt on me. And the same thing, I've literally got like a massive bandage on my abdomen. So it was very weird. It was a very unorthodox way to get my black belt, basically.
I assume you didn't get thrown then as a result of that.
No judo throws. Walk the gauntlet now, Kurt. But no, none of that. It was very like a couple of handshakes. I think everybody was a little bit like, we're really not sure how well Kurt is right now. Yeah. So I got to give a speech too. I probably spoke, honestly, a bunch of nonsense for probably 5 or 6 minutes about my journey and whatever, but it was such a blur. I was already so like wigged out, not myself, like on drugs also. But and then I was like, holy shit, I'm a black belt, and like that's my story. So yeah.
I mean, did it change anything? I mean, obviously you had 2 surgeries back to back, but did it change anything for you for that first role? Did it change your mindset? Did you feel like a different person?
Not initially. Because I was out. It was going to be 8 weeks out, no matter what. Best case scenario, I was going to be out for a while. As I started to come back, it was the same kind of thing. Like I was really scared to engage my core and like how do I sweep somebody? How do I whatever? And so I was playing very, very easy and that kind of thing. And ultimately, I ended up needing to have a second surgery because it was. First one was emergency and kind of exploratory, and they were like, you know what? You seem to have a lot of thin tissue, but we're not dealing with it in the emergency part of it, but you should schedule a second surgery. So I ended up in January of this year, only 3 months after I had the first one, or 2.5. So it's barely healed. And I have like an 18-inch mesh from basically my solar plexus down into my pelvis. So and that was much, much worse. That one, I literally could not get out of a chair for 3 days. There was 3 days where I was stuck. I mean, if the house was on fire, I would have just had to deal with it. And
well, that's terrifying.
Yes. And then it was a good 2-3 weeks before I was able to go to the bathroom by myself, that kind of thing. And then, and then all of a sudden it just kind of skyrocketed. Like, I feel pretty good. Like I'm gonna go for a walk, and then my walks turned into jogs, and then I'm gonna start working out again, and I'm doing bands, and I mean now I'm actually hitting new numbers now. I'm only 9-ish months out of surgery at this point, and I'm like, I mean I did chest day today, so it's and like I said, new numbers. I'm doing really really well. So my jiu-jitsu has gotten much better. I'm actually in arguably the best shape of my life. Part of it, I was forced to lose a good amount of weight that I've been carrying. And then the other part of it is I'm, putting on muscle and working on my game. And yeah, I mean, I sparred last night. We had 3 black belts on the mats, and I'm going hard with the boys. So
that's awesome. It's great to hear the recovery stories. I mean, something I generally have been asking, but I tend to do a little bit later, but this feels like the right time, is like, how did you mentally deal with that kind of layoff? Because for people who make jiu-jitsu a part of their life, like it's a part of their life. It's an escape. It's a whatever. But layoffs are hard. Like, how did you handle that?
It was super hard. So I also, at the time, right at the second surgery, I was supposed to be in London for a pretty serious work situation. I was supposed to be in London for like 5 weeks. It was a big business trip that I also had to be like, sorry. Yeah. And so that sucked, and I was getting a lot of pressure because the event was going to be very public as well. So it was a little bit like, why isn't Kurt here? Is it like there were literally people saying, did he fake his surgery and his injuries and all this stuff? I work in media, and it was a large court case I was covering. It was a whole thing. So there's like weird politics tangled up in it. So honestly, for my mental health and stuff, it was a pretty like, I'm actually in the worst pain of my life and missing this key moment in my career. And people, then you get the like, now Kurt's probably getting phased out. There's people like discussing whether or not I'm getting fired or have quit, and I'm just like, I really hope this isn't the, I peaked 3 months ago and I didn't even know it.
Right.
Now my life is in a downward spiral. But it was very, very hard. It would have been a time when I would have really liked to just do some jiu-jitsu and stay normal. So no, it was a very rough time. My wife was also pregnant with our 3rd child at the time. And so she's a champ though. And actually she deserves more credit than basically anyone in the world. She is like, I create so much nonsense, and she is so so like loving, forgiving, supportive. And I mean, like, I would argue you don't really know who you married until they have to help you in the bathroom for weeks at a time. And like, that's where we were at.
I hate to agree with that statement, but I very much agree with that statement because it's a painful one to have to think about each time I have that.
Yeah.
So like, but how did you, like, what was your mindset? Because I feel like injuries is something that is endemic to the sport of jiu-jitsu, even though it didn't happen to you on the mat. Like, it's something that's so kind of baked into our sport. There's torn ACLs and broken arms and whatever, and people just don't really talk about how to handle those like off the mat things. So like, what worked for you? How did you get through it?
I mean, initially it was like catching up on TV, which is not something that I do ever at all. So for a good 10 days, like, that was okay. And it was like, wow, these shows that people have been talking about for a couple of years are pretty good. And then you start getting a little, I'm pretty OCD and need to keep my hands busy. So I started with 11-pound little weights, and I'm sitting and I was like, you know what? I've never just sat and worked on like hypertrophy and this, like, I've always been like athletically strong, but I've never been like, let's work on my muscles. And you know what? I am stuck in a chair for I don't know how long, but my arms work. And so I just started doing like, I'm doing curls in a chair. And then I bought some like aerobic bands and stuff on Amazon. So I'm doing the same thing. So I'm like holding a band out in front of myself and just like, all right, I'm working on my rear delts. And like, it's 7 pounds of resistance, and it is, old lady kind of weights, but this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to do something. So A, that my body doesn't fall apart as I'm sitting here, and B, so when I get back, I'm not just like even weaker than when I started. And so I talked to my doctor about it. Like, hey, I'm very unsure what I'm allowed to do with this thing. And she's like, no, honestly, you should push it. Don't push it hard, but push it a little bit. Like, use your body. Your body's meant to be used. And so that's what it was. So I literally went from, you know, the lamest looking, like literally pink workout pants to, you know, to all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm back on my feet. And then I was, my neighbors, I'm sure will tell you, like, Kurt walked a lot for a good couple of months, like at weird hours even. Like, and I was walking 5-6 miles a day. Once I finally got my footing back, I was like, okay, I can't run, I can't train, I can't get real sweaty. I just kind of I can't make my body move that much right now, but I can walk. And if I can walk for 4 hours, I'm still burning a good amount of calories and that kind of thing. So I just was walking at a very slow pace, but long time, like put headphones in, listen to podcasts and that kind of thing. So that's what it looked like for probably 3 months, something like that.
And you mostly maintained your sanity?
As much as possible.
Okay.
I mean, I'm still here. I'm you know, like didn't fall into a black hole, but it was rough. It was honestly pretty embarrassing. I'm also quite big. I'm 6'3". I'm in good shape now. I weigh 250 pounds. So I mean, I look like a Sasquatch walking around. and like, so for me to also be weak, I'm just like, man, this sucks. So that was hard, but I'm glad I went through it. Taught me a lot about my own humility, but also like just how supportive my wife can be, and that's probably the biggest lesson out of it.
That's also like a wonderful side effect. Like, not the way you want to figure it out, but a wonderful side effect.
Yeah.
How did you get into jiu-jitsu?
Man, it's a few things. So I actually started about 4 years earlier doing Kempo karate in a like strip mall, typical, exactly what you'd picture out of strip mall karate. And I went in there because I met an instructor. His name was Wayne Wilkinson, and he was friends with my uncle, and we met at my grandfather's funeral. I come from a very weird family, super broken home. Parents were way too young when I was born. Lot of nonsense. A lot of like, well, your uncle's in jail again, and you're this and that, and okay, nobody's welcome at Christmas this year, and that kind of thing. And so it was a little weird anyways to be at my grandfather's funeral, because I had a relationship with him, but I hadn't seen my cousins in a lot of years and that kind of thing. So it was a little bit of like tension about, hey, is this going to turn into like a family fight instead of celebrating grandpa? And it ended up being a lot of fun, actually. It was good to catch up with everybody. Everybody was cool. It was a really nice thing. And then I meet this guy who my uncle brought with him, which was like, why did my uncle bring essentially a drinking buddy? And so, but he was really great. And he was like, dude, you should come train. I own a school. I'm a 5th degree black belt in Kempo karate. And I was like, you know what? I've always kind of wanted to do that. And I was upset about my grandpa and all this stuff. And so he was just super cool. And so I started doing it. And actually my younger brother came too. My brother's about 4 years younger than me. And we started doing it together. And he worked a little bit of jiu-jitsu into his curriculum, but he was cagey about it because I think he begrudgingly started learning jiu-jitsu because he knew he had to. And this would have been, what would it be? Probably 2006 or 7. And so he was, I came to learn he was a blue belt under Compredo outside of Chicago. But he would teach us this thing and he'd go into, well, in Japan, you know, the triangle choke. Like, so he always had like a reason why, but it's like, dude, we're just doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Like, why has it got to be any other thing? And I got sick of the nonsense with it, and I wanted to grapple more. And so I ended up looking up, hey, where can I train? And there was a Carlson Gracie affiliate in town. Started going there, and I just never quit. I got my ass absolutely handed to me by the smallest guy in the room who was a blue belt, and was like, you know what? That was terrifying, and also like I want to learn how to do that. And so that was 2010, I guess, when I went into Carlson Gracie's, and that was it. Like, I've been like, I haven't missed a week of jiu-jitsu outside of an injury or two since 2010. So
I mean, that's kind of a testament to like being passionate about something and just like finding a niche and being like, wow, this is for me.
Yeah. Yep.
I love that kind of consistency too. I feel like every person I talk to is like, this is an amazing sport. They're like, I'm hooked, and now I don't know how to exist without thinking about it.
It's weird.
Yeah. One of the things you had said to me, in like the get to know each other thing was you said you like being passionate without being negative. And I love that concept. The reason I wanted to bring it up is because most of us, in my experience, when we do jujitsu, we're like, man, I suck at this. And no matter how good you are, how your coaches tell you you're doing, it's like, how do you be passionate? How have you been passionate without being negative about something where most of us end up being like, man, I suck at this?
You know, I could come up with a million ways why, like, well, here I worked on this thing and I read this book and whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the reality of it is I came from a crazy family and there was a lot of like mental abuse in the home, but it was still like, all right, it didn't matter how much trauma or whatever was going on. It was like, be at the dinner table and now we're all joking or something. And it was like, just shut it off and go, like, get back to now we're pretending to be a family again. And like, I think as toxic and traumatic as that was, it also taught me how to deal with all the other stresses in life. That, like, you know what? My boss yells in my face and maybe he's a toxic prick. But, you know, while half the team is like, I can't work here, I won't be treated this way, I'm just always like, I don't know, man, wasn't that scary. I'll just get back to whatever I was up to. And so I think that taught me how to keep my cool under pressure in a lot of ways. And then jiu-jitsu initially was really triggering for me. Like, I remember just the first few times, like, you know, somebody like sitting on my face or like, I'm literally getting crushed and this kind of thing, and kind of panic, like my adrenaline's through the roof. And there were a few times I had to tap to just pressure or just whatever. I was also super out of shape at the time, so it was not conducive to like, hey, this is fun. It was really, really bad at first. But I remember I had one of my coaches, my first Nogi coach, his name was Mark Vujovic. He's like lives in Korea now. He's Serbian black belt. But I tapped to pressure from a guy that was significantly smaller than me, and he just like laughs at me. He's like, bro, you got to be able to just get through the whole roll. And I was like, I wanted to argue with him, but then I paused and I'm like, if I say anything, I'm the loser here, right? And so I was like, thanks, coach. And I was pissed off about it, but I realized ultimately he doesn't care. If I quit, he'll forget about me in probably a day. By the afternoon, like, he won't know who I am. It won't matter. Like, there won't be some like, nobody's gonna make a documentary about here was Kurt's trauma in jiu-jitsu and why he should have quit and all this stuff, you know. And it's like, I came to realize from those two experiences, just from jiu-jitsu in general, teaches you how to take a beating and keep your cool. But that was also most of my life growing up, was how to take a beating and keep your cool. And it showed me that it really is a choice, because I know a lot of people that have gone through a lot of trauma and can't deal with anything because of it. And then I also know a lot of people that were raised with a silver spoon and can't deal with anything because of it. And so I think there's a big part of it that's a choice, but it's also the experience. You got to take what you're given, and you have to choose how you're going to deal with it. And ultimately I've chosen to be positive with it. And so I don't think it's a special thing about me necessarily. It was just a choice that I made, and I think anybody can make that same choice, and that's it.
I feel like one of the things that is a relatively consistent thing amongst people who start jujitsu is they have this moment of like, can I do this? And it sounds like for you, it was like from a triggered perspective, right? Some people are just like, I don't know if I can, but you were like, I'm not sure if I'm okay here. Do you have any like advice for people who are like going through that?
It's not going to kill you. Jiu-jitsu feels scary. It is terrifying to be pinned by somebody and be wrapped up or be choked or all of those things. And like, but it simulates it in the safest possible way to simulate it. And I think even for people that suffer from anxiety and other things, like that could be a really good way to like find a good beginner's program in jiu-jitsu, find a good coach that runs a safe place, and you can learn to deal with the kind of stuff that is very, very real. People get attacked for no reason. And when you get to see, here's how I respond to an attack. And if it is pure blackout panic and hyperventilation and all these things, like, you will be victimized if you get stuck in that situation. And I would have been. I had to admit, like, okay, I'm actually not a tough person fundamentally. And so I need to either get very good at pretending to be until I become one, or I just get to be a victim forever. And so it was again a choice, but it's a choice to practice. And I didn't know how long that road would be, or if that road had an end, where there would be a point in my life where I'd say, you know what, I can basically take care of myself in a combat situation or some kind of unwanted attack or something. And I think too many people want there to be a simpler solution, but in reality, it's a difficult decision, and then it's a lot of practice. And that's anything you're going to get good at is, I got to decide to do it, and then I've got to just sweat and sweat and sweat and sweat until I become very good at it. And then when you're very good at it, all of a sudden the things around it they're just not scary anymore. And so I guess that's my advice about it. Just
like the only way over is through kind of a thing.
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, there's not a pill you can take. There's no, as much as I wish there was like a dim mock move, like they don't exist. Yeah. And same thing, like I live in Florida. I get a lot of firearms people. Hey, I'm armed, man. I'm like, you ever drawn your weapon while somebody's trying to attack you? Like, do you drill that? And they're like, well, I mean, I'm like, like try to use your hands while you're under attack. Because if you haven't competed in jiu-jitsu, you don't know that your hands do this when you have adrenaline in your body. And you can't undo this. And if you can't undo this, you can't use your firearm. And that's not a lesson you'll learn until mean guy on top of you with a knife or whatever. And that's the worst possible time to learn that lesson about your fight or flight response. Yeah. And adrenaline and everything else. So, yeah.
I tell you, martial arts was the time. I learned it before jiu-jitsu, but I did not realize that fight or flight actually was not just fight or flight, that it's fight, flight, or freeze. And when I learned that in my military days, and when I found out that there was a third option and that there are people who exercise that third option, I was like, oh, this feels like a thing that I want to get under control before it has the ability to only control me.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a terrifying life lesson in my teens.
Yeah, no, and again, like, what a time to learn it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're in basic or God forbid you're on a battlefield and you realize that the toughest guy as soon as you start hearing bullets going over, like, you're done. You black out, frozen. Like, now I'm dragging my uninjured friend to safety. Like,
that's exactly where I learned it, was in basic training, and one of my friends completely froze, and we were dragging him through the live fire obstacle course, and I was like, this is terrifying to have to drag someone through. I do not like this.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah. But I'm glad I learned it then, and it has been one of those things that, like, no matter what kind of pressure gets put on me, I'm like, okay, I can handle this.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So I want to change gears here, because I want to talk. You do so many interesting things, and I want to make sure we get through at least a couple of others. Like, sure. you somehow became a Bitcoin historian, which I think is a fascinating thing to be a historian about something that has only been around for 15-ish years.
Yep. Yep.
So before I ask you more about that, like, what is cryptocurrency and what is Bitcoin for some of the people who may not have ever heard of it or passively heard of it?
Yep. Sure. Basically, think of it as a modern accounting system. And you kind of can't explain what Bitcoin is until you know what other payment systems are. But let's just take Visa. Lots of people use Visa, MasterCard, whatever.
Yep.
You swipe a card. There is about 5 companies in the middle of your swipe and your bank. And all those people do different validations to your transaction. And then they all take a little cut. And ultimately, the companies get paid. And if there's a problem, if they've made a mistake, they can rectify it because they control the ledger. It is a one ledger. There's an authority that decides whether or not that is a valid or an invalid payment. And that's fine. That works for most people. But if you are politically oppressed in some way, or you're in some way inconvenient to the banking infrastructure or whatever, like all of a sudden, like, hey, your card is off and you may not do payments. And that's not something a lot of us deal with in the Western Hemisphere, but if you lived in Cyprus 10 years ago, like that's a thing that happens. Or if you live all over the global South, like, sorry, payment infrastructure is just not that great. And if you're the wrong party one day, like, sorry, you just might not have the ability to make a payment. And so Bitcoin fundamentally solves a payment problem by creating competition to be a really good accountant. And so there's a million technical ways to get into what's actually happening there. But imagine if I send a payment to you and I broadcast it to a group of people that want to earn my money competitively by accounting for my payment the best, like reconciling it better, faster, cheaper. And so now there's a competition for every single payment that happens on this network. That is what we call mining. So mining is what happens in that competitive process. Whoever does it the best gets rewarded both my transaction fee and also like a built-in subsidy on the network. And so this creates an incentive system that allows anybody to come and compete to be the payment processing company in a distributed manner. So you're taking away the corporate monolith of payments and saying anyone can be a payment processor. You have to be good at it. You have to compete. But if you get good at it, there's a lot of money to be made by being good at it. And that's your fundamental thing that blockchain does, is you distribute the consensus of writing to a ledger for payments, and you make it that much more difficult to censor. You take the censorship likelihood and you reduce it by like 99.99999% by distributing it. It also offers all kinds of security persistence. If there's a blackout across the EU, like, payments still work because there's still people processing in the US and Asia or whatever else. And so it just adds persistence and security to this concept of global payments that didn't exist before. It reduces the friction of global remittance and a whole bunch of other things. But also just simple payments. I think simple payments is the easiest thing and the least adopted in the space for whatever reason. But the
simple question that comes from that is like, to most people, why is this such a polarizing concept? That's
a tough one.
Yeah, that feels like the big question often when people are learning about it. Like, this should just work.
Well, it's a few things. I think, one, there's a lot of weird, like, political, maybe even patriotism is the right word, like, tied into, especially for Americans, like the US dollar is the global reserve currency. It's what oil's traded in globally. So there's a lot of like, well, the United States and the US dollar and the US military and all these things are all like, hey, we're all supposed to love these things because they've given us a good life, and they have. So this is, it's not easy to divorce yourself from the fact that the US dollar also is a very bad thing in a lot of ways, in that it is a debt note, and you can never really repay that debt. It's kind of a thing that is tumbled into the entire Federal Reserve System, and I can get very, very political into the reasons why the dollar is bad. And Bitcoin fixes them by doing a few things. Like, there's only a finite amount of them. The finite amount of them is globally auditable, so nobody can just print money out of nowhere, and all that stuff. Now, that's very cool to normal people, but it's very threatening to the people in power. And so, in part, there's a lot of propaganda about Bitcoin being very bad, very dangerous. It's just crime money. Only criminals would need money that can't be censored. Why would a good person need irreversible global payments and this kind of thing? So there's propaganda tied into it. And then there's also the fact that Bitcoin, the culture has always been roughly 50% scammers. And so because it is unstoppable, it does actually also attract a lot of criminals, because yes, irreversible payments are a good thing if I'm trading in guns and drugs and human trafficking and that kind of thing. It is a convenient tool for those things too. And then the propaganda machine makes it like, okay, every time somebody does something illegal with Bitcoin, if we hate Bitcoin, we're gonna keep putting that on the news. And so then it's just like any other political issue. There's bad information on all sides, and there's a bunch of different powerful interests that are opposed to the technology for their own reasons, and then they form a coalition about here's all the reasons Bitcoin is bad and you should stay away from it, and then ultimately people like me get to have a podcast and explain all the things that are good about it, and while acknowledging the things that are bad about it, but also trying to get through that noise and say, hey, look, ultimately here's why guns are good and here's why guns are bad, and good people with guns is more good than bad, and bad people with guns is more bad than good, and ultimately we need to make a decision as a people. And so we get there, but it's political, it's cultural, and all kinds of problems with why there's so much bad information about Bitcoin.
So what inspired you to become such a vocal advocate of this? Not just Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, but just to be a vocal advocate?
First of all, I like to argue. So I like politics, but I'm apolitical, so I don't vote. But the underlying philosophy, I was always a philosophy nerd. I was in philosophy club when I was a kid. This is what I did through high school and college. I was on debate team and all of these things. But the reason for it is that I think we would be a better culture if we could get all the way to the truth. And here's the thing. Even now, we're in the middle of election season. We've got 2 weeks left before it's Donald Trump or Kamala Harris here. And what does the average person care about in that election, right? So you have extremists on both sides. You have the extreme activists for things on both sides, right? But there's also the majority of voters are just saying, man, what is going to make my bank account not drain fastest? And that's how I'm voting. That's how every normal person is voting, because you don't have time. You don't have time to be well, when does human life start? Let's get a bunch of biologists out here because I'm going to be pro-life or pro-choice. And then you get the people over here. Is it, I don't know, are we going to enter World War III? Does helping Ukraine and Israel and Lebanon, what are, all of that is already way past people's pay grades to make a rational and educated decision on. And so the practical thing is to vote on what actually matters to you as an individual. But I've always been a philosophy nerd, and one of those things has always been the philosophy of money, and that money really is a mechanism for discovering truth. Economies are super inefficient, right? The classic example is money probably was invented when a guy with chickens wanted some pies, and they didn't want to trade pies for chickens, so they needed some kind of intermediary thing that they both wanted. And so, okay, we standardize a money, let's say it's gold or silver, and that thing can have a numerical value that can issue through time and whatever. And so voila, we have money. We don't actually have any idea how money was invented, but the very first written history of money that we have is from Sumeria. And in that writing on literal rocks, on clay tablets and this kind of thing, are complex debt instruments with interest and derivatives and all kinds. So our earliest history comes in with stuff that a Goldman Sachs guy would look at and be like, oh wow, okay, they were doing stuff I do, and it's very weird. So anyways, to get into the politics of money a little bit, it can be a control mechanism. Now, it's lightly a control mechanism in the US, but in a lot of places around the world, the money is a deep, dark control mechanism for the people. And so I've always been a gold advocate, or I was a gold advocate for a very long time, because it's something that doesn't matter where you go in the whole world. I could end up, talking to Maasai warriors in Kenya, and I've got gold coins, and they know what those gold coins are worth. They know what can be bought with them at whatever places that they are doing business. They know what they buy. And it's the same thing if I end up in South America, or it's the same thing if I end up in New York City. There is a number, value, purchasing power of that thing everywhere. And so if we could depoliticize the money and make it that, hey, sorry, the U.S. needs to, go blow something up or annex some other thing over here or whatever. And hey, here's another $1 trillion out of nowhere. Or the same thing happens with the European Central Bank and all these other things. It happens everywhere. And it gives just an absurd, inordinate amount of power to the people that print the money. And it comes entirely to the detriment of the people that work in the economy and pay taxes, because that's how that gets repaid. And so when Bitcoin fell in my lap in 2012, somebody just told me about Bitcoin. And I realized, like, son of a bitch, it's gold, but I can just sit at my desk and do business with somebody in like South Korea instantly, the same way that I would do business with them in gold, in that it has the same price everywhere. It has the same purchasing power no matter what, and all these other things, but it's digital. And so it means that I don't have to figure out how to bring a bag of gold through an airport, which is itself like tax implications. They'll probably get confiscated and all this other stuff, because it's gold. It's like, it's my gold, but I have to bring paperwork and all that. It's a nightmare. But with Bitcoin, I could take $1 billion through an airport. Technically, it would be illegal because you need to declare that, but it can be done. Or I don't even have to do the airport. I can literally just do business from my desk with any other person connected to the internet. And like, holy cow, that makes the central banks, it's not going to make them go away, but it'll make them more respectful. And so, and that's why it appealed to me. And then it was like, we got to get this right, because if we get this right, all of a sudden the world becomes smaller in all the ways that matter. And that's the world I want to live in.
Isn't Bitcoin sort of at this point treated as like a foreign exchange, and therefore it's got some pinned value, and as a result, anything that you do, even if it's you trading at your desk, that it still gets taxed? I mean, is that a backslide in your opinion?
A huge backslide.
Okay.
And I think that's part of the attack on Bitcoin. So a lot of the reason why I've focused on Bitcoin's history is so that people will ask me these kinds of questions, because almost everyone in the Bitcoin space is going to tell you, like, dude, buy Bitcoin, do nothing, and in 5 years you're rich, right? Like, that's the thing you're going to be pitched 99% of the time with Bitcoin. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because there's just not that much more money that can fly into Bitcoin at this point. So, I mean, sorry, everybody, you're late to Bitcoin if you're looking to make bonkers money on just holding the asset. But because it's been treated that way, because it was treated as an investment, well, then, of course, the government's going to look at it and say, well, we should regulate it as an investment asset. We should, if you're only trading it or you're only using it for speculation, we're going to tax it that way. And so it's kind of a consequence of us failing to get Bitcoin adopted as a payments technology. And now we're being punished by people who are saying, hey, we don't care what it's for. We're taxing you for what you did with it. And that's, that's what we get.
So that's why you took on like the historian side of this. Like you said, let me understand where this comes from and let me understand where this is going. And that's the sort of philosophical through line of like, how does this digital currency translate to money and the concept of how people use it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and people are very poorly educated, unfortunately. And we just don't have time. It's not even a criticism of people, but we don't have time to digest everything. So there's a certain amount of trust that goes into all kinds of things. And money is a huge one that people don't understand. Now, when I first got into Bitcoin, the culture was very one way. And then it changed very quickly when the price went up. In 2013, the price went up, or 2013 into 14. It was like the end of 2013. The price went from like $50 a coin. And in 3 months, it was like $1,000 a coin. And so a bunch of us were like, holy cow, I kind of just became rich. And now what? So it very quickly, all of a sudden, the people who were in it for like crypto anarchy and like, hey, we're going to overthrow the big payments companies or the big banks or whatever, all of a sudden they're like, I'm going to be an investment influencer. And so and that sells really well. Like, if I go around trying to explain to people like, hey, you could build this really interesting tech company, most people are like, how am I going to build a tech company? Why am I going to do business with this thing that I don't understand? But if I go around telling them, hey, all you got to do is throw $1,000 into this thing and it'll go up in value over time. Like, that's an easy sell. I could do that with real estate investment or whatever. And there's just going to be a lot of people that buy that because it's a get rich quick scheme. And so the culture flipped. All of a sudden, everybody got kind of, like, it's not even super rich, but made a lot of money. And then it was like, how do we keep this going? How do I get very, very rich? And so everybody just became like a marketing voice for pumping Bitcoin. And I just refused to do it. I just kept talking about like, hey, by the way, there's this token protocol that's being built that allows us to do all these cool things over. And this is 2013, 14. People are like, Kurt, shut up. We don't want to hear about it. And I'd be like, well, if you read like here's the other thing. All of the founding writings of Bitcoin by its creator, they're public. You can read them. And like, so I just kept quoting him. I'm like, well, Satoshi Nakamoto said, and I just got really good at quoting him. And so people started calling me either Kurtopedia or Kurt the Bitcoin historian, both of which were kind of derogatory when they were used. But it just kind of, it stuck. It became my moniker that okay, Kurt's not going to shut up about what Bitcoin was intended to be for. And it turned into a career.
I honestly would feel like if somebody called me that, I would feel very flattered, even if they meant it in an insulting way, as long as I was getting the information right. Like,
pretty much.
There's a lot worse things I could be called. So you kind of dove in and said, okay, this is going to be my thing now. And you took on the historian approach for something that is very, very, it's weird to be nostalgic about a concept like, 10 years ago. But yep. I mean, that's kind of what you did. Like, how did you decide that you're stopping at sort of the beginning, or did you just say, let me keep going? Because you already talked a little bit about the history of money, so it sounds like you went a little further back.
So I've always been into history. So the history of money was something that I already had in my pocket. And then studying ancient Middle Eastern history and these kind of things were all things that I was into for my own reasons. And then, so when Bitcoin came around, it just was like, oh, cool. Like, this is the future of money. But I watched the culture, and I don't know if it was planned. I don't know if there was some like seedy entity that was feeding this to people, or if it just was the culture decided at the same time, like, we're going to stop talking about what Bitcoin was for and the original creators, because the creator disappeared too. And by 2011, he like pieced out, and then it was like, okay, now there's new guys in charge. And the sophomore class was very like, all right, here's all the things we didn't like about Bitcoin. Here's all the things we didn't like about Satoshi. And so all of a sudden I'm watching this like whitewashing and very politically convenient changing of the narrative. And like, we've seen the same thing happen with it's like Martin Luther King. Like, Martin Luther King was an anti-government activist, and depending on how you feel about the history, I think it's pretty clear that he was murdered by the FBI. And so now you can go to the MLK Memorial in Washington, D.C., and it's a whole thing. And here's the U.S. government giving you the version of Martin Luther King that they want you to hear about. And his own daughters have criticized the things at the memorial, and like, we didn't approve that he would have hated this. But it's like, yeah, but here's the memorial, and isn't it great? And we all love him. And it's like, no, you love the statue you created of him. And you like, so it's, and you always do this with political figures. As soon as they become inconvenient in some way, you twist them and change them. And, some of them you turn into, hey, we're going to lionize this guy. And other people, we just, the completely memory hole, like, we need to kill all memories of this character. And I saw that happening to Satoshi Nakamoto literally 2 years after he disappeared. And I was like, you know what? I am in a position to not let that happen, and I'm not going to let that happen. And so I won't shut up about it. And that is kind of, that's really been it, is I just refuse to accept fallacies about this person that I really, really respect, and who changed my view on whether we could solve the global money problem. And it just matters to me. So that's why I'm here.
Totally fair. I got to be honest. I didn't really like think about the FBI had Martin Luther King assassinated. That's probably something I want to see if I can read up on, but it never even. The
King family actually won the civil trial against the FBI. So the criminal case, it was found inconclusive. We don't know, but the Kings went and sued in civil court the FBI, and the FBI ended up like losing and paying the bill. So, but this is why it's debated. It was like, well, here's the criminal case where there was no wrongdoing found. It's like, yes, but here's the civil trial where they wrote a big check and apologized for killing him. So it's. I
feel like that's something they probably should have taught us in school, at least.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know. Sure. The American educational system sometimes is like, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, one of the other things that I really was kind of curious about is like, how much of this history of currency has Bitcoin taken into the lessons of building out and politicizing is almost the wrong word, but like getting a more modern currency out there. Like how many of these lessons did they take, and how many things did they just sort of say, you know what, it worked kind of then, and we're going to do it again?
It's an interesting question. Bitcoin, it's funny because Bitcoin is a novel idea in a few key ways, but it's actually not a particularly new idea in a whole bunch of other ways. It really is an amalgamation of literally lessons from ancient history about gold and like the numis, like how did you start mining it, like all of these things. Like, so we literally call Bitcoin transaction processing, we call it mining for the same reasons that you mine gold. Like if there's no work that goes into it, its value starts to become very subjective. But the fact that work goes into extracting it and minting it and purifying it, all these things is part of its value proposition. Then there's also things like how it actually functions. Like the way a Bitcoin works is through a cryptographic signature process. So it uses cryptography to create keys, and those keys work like the signing of a contract. So imagine if every time I made a payment, it was like me and you agreed to very simple contract terms, but there's a signature that actually gets passed. And so that goes into like English common law and a bunch of concepts there about like the movement of pieces of property. And like, if you can trace it back, like that's, so it's all these things. So there's lots of very important old principle macroeconomic stuff that went into the design of Bitcoin and the incentives. But then the way that you use it is very simple at the top level. It's just, I mean, it's literally give me your payment address. Okay, here it is. There, it's yours instantaneously. And so it works the way that you would expect like Venmo or Cash App or whatever to use. Like from the user standpoint, that's how it works. But underlying, there's a lot of very interesting stuff, which is why there are university courses about Bitcoin, because they came to realize as people started to understand it, people that understand old like history of money and these kind of things and macroeconomics are like, oh wow, he must have been classically educated in economics and law and history and all. Like it's very, very thorough in the way that the incentives are set up. Like it's very game theoretical as well, which is why a lot of people have theorized, like, did the CIA or the NSA create this? Because there's a lot of that kind of stuff too. Like, oh, interesting. These incentives kind of force you to play this game in this way. And all, like, it's very, very deep. As you get deeper into it, you kind of can't find the bottom of the rabbit hole.
Right.
But then the way that it works is very, very discoverable for normal people. And normal people don't have to worry. It's like driving a supercar, right? Like supercars are very precise and they're very cool, but you know, press the gas, turn the wheel, like I can drive the thing, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
One of the other corollary things that I feel like I've always kind of been concerned about is it's similar to the AI problem of mining takes a big toll on the environment. And as somebody who owns a mining company, Gorilla Pool, like how does that land for you? How, like, is there, carbon neutrality that you think about? Any of those kinds of questions?
So a bit. I mean, it can be a concern, and it's something that I've talked about quite a bit. And that when we talk about other infrastructure, payments infrastructure, people don't really talk about how much carbon like Visa or MasterCard create, because Visa and MasterCard create a net good for the world. They reduce the friction of business, and these things are good. People also don't criticize, like, man, that hospital really is consuming a lot of electricity, because we just want to live in a world that has hospitals that are open 24/7 and they always work. Now, Bitcoin right now, I'm very happy to admit, is mostly an inefficient process that is trying to do a big global experiment in changing the money. And you can say, yes, it is a net polluter. It's doing a lot of things that if you are measuring those things are bad. Caveat is they're bad today. But we are trying like ever living hell to change the efficiency of the global economy, but like by orders of magnitude. So if we're right and if we win, we're going to reduce the payment carbon footprint of everything by orders of magnitude. So I mean, I will be very proud of this when we win. and it's part of the reason why I care so much about getting it right, because I'm like just my company. My company's a pretty small mining company, but we're consuming the power of a small county on like a daily basis in order to operate it. And like, it's essentially an investment that we're making into, I really, really, really want this to pay off. Not just as a company, we do okay as a company financially, but I want it to pay off in the global sense where I can say, look, we invested and did a backslide, and the ledger on our impact on the world was negative for a very long time, but it was about this vision for making the world a better place. And so if we fail, well, I mean, that's that's just something I'm going to have to live with, I guess. But it's noble either way. It was not done for, greed or malice or even just, I just didn't care, like that kind of thing. I really, really care. And so I hope we get this solved and get it right.
That's one of the, I think, amazing things about being an entrepreneur is like, you have this vision of like, I want to see the world differently, like change because of me, because of the company, because of the push of the people. I want to see it better than where I left it. And I think that there's like sometimes people who aren't entrepreneurs struggle with that vision that's like, well, you're doing damage. And I know you've started a couple of companies over the years, as have I, and I feel like that's a thing that's not easy for most people to understand. But it's nice to hear that you have that vision. You're like, okay, this is a trade-off that I've thought about. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I read a statistic just about a week ago, and it was saying that something like 50% of all people in the Western Hemisphere can't make a presupposition about an occurrence that didn't happen. So when you say like, are you hungry? And they say, no. Well, would you be hungry if you didn't eat breakfast? And they say, well, no, I did eat breakfast. And you say, yes, but if you had not eaten breakfast, would you be hungry? And they can't process that thought because they had breakfast. And so there's like this certain number of people that can't walk through a hypothetical that's even just one step deep. So like you said, to think about, hey, like here's a risk calculation, like that's so far out of so many people's skill sets, which is something I've had to learn. Like I've been an entrepreneur basically my whole life, but the kind of people who can't be an entrepreneur, I didn't realize that was not just a choice, but for a lot of people, they can't be an entrepreneur. And so that's a little bit of a weird one for me. It's taken a lot for me to accept, but you're absolutely right in saying that people can't get there. So, yeah.
The way I actually learned that lesson was when I was working for somebody, and I was like, I wonder if I can do this for myself. And I started talking to one of the other people that I was working with, and they were like, how would you know what to do? And I was like, what? And it was just like that immediate disconnect of like, well, I will figure out what the next thing is. And they're like, but if somebody's not telling you what to do. And I very quickly learned that, like, there's a reason that people say, like, some people are just show up to work and some people show up to do a job and learn and improve. And those are not the same people often.
Yeah, it's weird.
And, this kind of goes into like the next thing I wanted to talk about was like, you're a media personality. You're like a podcaster. Like, you basically have made a living out of communicating with people. How do you bridge that gap when you're like, oh, this is a completely different type of person I'm trying to reach? When you're an entrepreneur, oftentimes you're talking to other business people like, hey, this other person can understand risks. They can see the next step. But you've chosen a life where you're like, I'm going to communicate to people about something incredibly complicated to a lot of people who may not even care. Like, how did you, not to trivialize what you're doing, but just realistically.
Sure. No. I guess I didn't care who didn't listen, because I kind of came into it by accident. Like every media job that I've ever had has been accidental. It has been somebody saying, hey, can you help me, or can you fill in, or can you do whatever? So I had my first radio show in 2003. I was still in high school, but one of my good friends was a year ahead of me and went to the local community college and joined the radio program. And he said, hey man, I'm really struggling to come up with content for my 1 hour on the air. Can you come be my guest? Can you just come check it out? I think you'd be really good at it. And I literally went in every week for the next 3 years. Like I went to that school to continue to do the show because I enjoyed the show so much. And like, it just turned into, I just really like being on a microphone. I like the interaction. I like to talk. And then the feedback loop. So we used to have a hardline phone. So we would take callers on the air. And so I loved the live chaos of it all also. And then, so I started podcasting really early. Like Apple created their podcast. I forget what they call it. Well, they didn't call it podcast initially, the app, but they invented the word podcast. Or at least as far as I'm aware, I think they invented it.
I think they called it Apple Cast, and they put it on the iPod, if I remember right. But I could be wrong.
That might be it might be the case. I remember seeing it as a feature in iTunes, and I was like, wow, how would I do this? But I'm 24 or something like that at the time, and was like, I'm gonna buy a microphone. I'm just gonna do it. I'll just record myself talking. I'm pretty good at this, and just started doing it. And so I was talking like news of the day. I was doing like a 3-minute. Like, here's who President Bush, I guess, at the time, this kind of thing, just be talking about whatever. And then it turned into like Facebook showed up, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll post my stuff on Facebook. And then I started getting people who were like, hey, I actually listen to your content. Your content's pretty good. Like, have you done this before? I was like, I had a radio show in college. And so, I was comfortable on the mic. And then I got into Bitcoin in 2012 and 13. So I was talking about that on Facebook nonstop. Everybody thought I was crazy, like off my rocker crazy. But then in 2016, Ethereum came out, and this concept of the ICO, the initial coin offering, and people started making money off of, dude, I paid $500 for this thing, and I turned it into 80 grand when it exploded. And so I started getting people ask me, is this that Bitcoin thing you were talking about? I was like, well, it's related, but it's not really. And so just all of a sudden that market heated up, and I went on Facebook Live. It was right around then Facebook Live became a thing that if you just click go live, every one of my friends would get a notification. Kurt's live on Facebook. And so I was like, wow, I'm going to go live on Facebook every weekday at noon, and I'm just going to answer questions live in the box about blockchain stuff, because I just had so many people texting me and whatever, and I was spending a bunch of time like sitting on my lap on my phone, like not hanging out with my girlfriend, like all this stuff, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to consolidate. I'm going to tell everybody, watch my show tomorrow at noon and I'll answer your question. And I have been podcasting or streaming or whatever about blockchain since 2016 now. I literally have not had even a break. It's been different shows and different promoters and different whatever, but it's always the next group who are like, hey, we'd love to have you on our network or whatever. Like, and it's always been live. I'm like the only guy that does a live show because I want that live chat. I want live questions. I want live feedback. And most people are scared to do it because they don't have the practice with it, but it's real. And I think that's why people like my show, is it's not edited and polished and whatever, and I fumble, and sometimes I'm not sure how to answer a question, but it is what it is. And yeah, so that's been my journey in just like, hey, I guess I'm a professional broadcaster too.
That's so funny. It's amazing what authenticity is and how it lands for people. And I often think that some people don't realize that what they like about someone is simply that they're being authentic, even if they don't like the person, they like the authenticity.
Yes.
And I feel like that gets lost a lot in just the striving for charisma or to be liked or whatever that is.
Well, just polish. And I watch professionals and I'm like, I'm actually not that good at this. And I'm and so, yeah, that's that. And I get the verbal diarrhea, but I don't know. I got my fans.
I was going to ask you, like, you do a lot of media, like, how do you prepare? And I think that you kind of just inadvertently answered that question. You're like, I just go for it.
Yeah. And that's what people like. You said it. It's the authenticity. I don't care if you disagree with me, you think I'm wrong, you think I'm crazy. I'm just being me. I'm going to answer you legitimately. And that's another thing. Like, part of my, hey, the truth really matters. Like, if I'm just me and I'm me all the way, if you like me, we should be friends. and I don't have to, it's not a character. I don't have to, hold on, I got to put my makeup on. I got to sit and do my, la, 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 la. It's just, there's none of that. This is me, me on Saturday night. It's me at church on Sunday. And if you do like me, cool, let's hang out. And if you don't like me, it's you definitely don't like me, and we just don't have to be friends, and that's okay too.
I think that's a healthy way of looking at things. To kind of bring a little full circle to this, like one of the things that I love about jujitsu, and I've always loved about jujitsu, is that when you roll with somebody, you can tell like what kind of person they are. And I feel like it's a super authentic thing when you get into a sparring session with somebody. Not that you're trying to kill them, but just like,
Sure.
so like how has that kind of authenticity translated for you on the mat?
It's an interesting question because it's definitely a way to communicate. I'm super playful on the mat. So I have never cared if I lose. Outside of maybe my first 6 months of jiu-jitsu when it really mattered to me if I, didn't get killed. But I realized very quickly that if you don't treat it like fun and treat jiu-jitsu like little missions that I'm trying to, it's not about being the best in the room ever, because I don't know if I've ever been the best in the room. It happens sometimes now, yeah. But I was not a natural athlete. I'm not particularly athletically competitive as a person. Like, I don't have a big ego about it. I wasn't like an NCAA, football, like, I can't lose. Like, just, it's not me. So even now, like, we get guests that come in, and I'm quite technical. I'm a very technical player, and I'm huge. So like, people look at me and they assume if I want to win, I'm going to be like smash pass and that kind of thing. But I don't play that way. I'm very whirly and like, I play gi and no gi. I've got crazy leg game. I play a lot of lapels. I play and this kind of thing. And so people are always like, I'll let them pass. And then they're like, okay, why? What water is he dragging me into? And then, I can invert and do these things. And so I like to play. And ultimately that's my language on the mats, is that I am here to have fun. If this is not a tournament, and even sometimes if it's a tournament, I still just want to have fun. I've never done like a cash prize tournament, in which case I would probably should turn it up. But even now I'll go to like IBJJF and stuff, and I'm just like, stupid smile on my face. And like, if they sweep me with something I've never seen before, I will laugh and say, that was cool, like directly to my competitor, and because it just is, it's fun. And that's what I love about it. And that's what I want to convey. That's the communication for it. But yeah, no, you see some people who show up with that ego, they'll like, I'll sweep them or so, watch them get swept. And you see it on their face. Like, I gave up points, this kind of thing. And it's like, bro, everyone can lose this. It doesn't matter who you are. Every greatest guy that ever did any combat sport had at least one stupid loss where they looked like they didn't know what they were doing. And that's also super healthy. So, yeah.
I think that's so funny. I'm the same way. When somebody does something to me, and like a couple, like maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I was teaching a class and it was no gi. And so sometimes we have drop-ins because we've got a very large school. And I ended up getting tapped by a small white belt woman because I don't go hard. I'm very playful. And she got me the Peruvian necktie and I cracked up. And initially she was a little upset about it. And I was like, no, that was fantastic. She's like, but you let me have it. I'm like, no, I just made a mistake. Like, you should be proud of that. That was hilarious. I'm so glad that happened. Like, now I know not to put my hand in that position next time. Like, that was great.
For sure. It is. It's so much fun. And I think that's how you keep it fun. If you have to win, at some point your body's going to quit winning, and then you quit. It's over. Your jiu-jitsu is over if you're not having fun anymore.
Yeah.
Do you train? So it's funny, actually, you mentioned that it was a woman. Like, my wife is a brown belt also.
So is mine.
So, awesome. So we trained together now for over 10 years. And I think so I was blue belt when we met. She was brand spanking new. And I think that's a little bit how I had to figure out, like, okay, I'm going to grapple with this girl, but if I beat her up, she's not going to want to play this game with me. And then, I don't know if I could be with her, frankly, but I think rolling with her definitely taught me that, like, I need to let her win a certain amount of victories in each thing. Like, so it's like, I need to be rolling to teach, not rolling to win. And so doing that early in my journey probably is the reason why I got just good at letting people score on me or whatever. So That's interesting. I'm curious if that's. Do you think that that's part of your part of why you find it playful is rolling with women? Because I think that might be it for me.
So for me, it's a little bit different. Like when I train with my wife, like they're much smaller than me, but they're way more technical. And like,
Yep.
it just I don't go hard because I just don't like going hard. My personality as a human is just being playful. Our mutual friend Charles Harriott has a shirt that says, "First you learn to be annoying, then you learn to be dangerous." And as soon as I saw that, I was like, that's me. I love being annoying on the mat. I just love being a playfully annoying person. And so when my wife and I met, we were both blue belts, although I come from the background of like being an all-American wrestler. So I know how to go hard. I just don't like it. It's not me. So when I train with anybody, I don't care if you're a small white belt or a giant black belt, I'm going to go the same 30 to 40% max.
Sure.
And what training with my wife taught me is I can go 30, 40%. I don't have to give up anything and I can still get my ass handed to me. And so I need to start being more, I can still go light, but I need to be more technical, predictable, and smart. And sometimes just when I'm doing that, because we never know what's going to happen, because I'm the bigger person, I just need to be a little bit more aware of potential danger, falling or whatever. And that's how I learned to train with smaller people. And now we have people who are, 100 pounds, 125 pounds in the gym, and they roll with me at 220 pounds, and they know it's a safe roll.
Yeah.
But it's not because I lose. It's not because I want to lose or teach. It's because I want to be playful, and I want everyone to want to roll with me. Unless you're a diehard competitor and you're like, well, that person's not going to go hard enough for me, which people do say to me. And it's like, fine, that's okay.
Whatever. Right.
We've got a gym of 500 people. Like, if you don't want to roll with me, we've got like 400 something other people that you can go trade with.
Yeah. And we have similar. So being that we're in South Florida, we're a vacation destination, largely for New Yorkers too. So we get a lot of guys that are from Henzo's and Marcelo's and Unity. And, they come in, and these are, hardened guys come in, and it's, we're not getting like the Meow Brothers don't come to us, but you get their training partners come in and they're, hey, I'm on vacation. Can I train here? And so we get a lot of that too, where people they're not sure what the vibe's going to be. Like, hey, is this a meat factory, or are you guys soft? Like, what's the game here? And I think it's good for us too, because we get to see a lot of jiu-jitsu, and then you got to learn to deal with, hey, I'm gonna get a couple rolls in every week from people whose games I don't know at all. And how do you deal with that? Like, you can either, try to grind them into the dirt so you don't have to deal with their jiu-jitsu, or just let them drag you into their deep water, which is my favorite thing to do. I'm just kind of getting grips. Like, where are you gonna go, man? Like, let's do it. I'll play my escapes from 75% submitted,
That's often the way I test the waters with somebody who's brand new, especially in the gi. I'll just hand them my sleeves, and if they immediately grab it and start, I'm like, okay, I'm going to need to either tap or slow this down so that I don't get hurt. But that's like usually my barometer for people.
Sure. That's a good way to put it.
That's actually where I started my jiu-jitsu career, was at Marcelo Garcia in New York City.
Oh, funny.
And so, I know a lot of those Unity, Marcelo, Henzo, Clockwork, now Master Skya folks out of New York City. And those are a lot of where I came from, jiu-jitsu wise.
Yeah, we get a lot of transplants because a lot of people will quit New York and move to South Florida too. So they're like, I live in Boca now. But it's probably more than half the mats, frankly, are guys with like New York and New Jersey accents and that kind of thing.
We're a diaspora, whether we like it or not.
For sure. Absolutely. But it's great. I mean, I've trained at Unity and Marcelo's. I've never been to Henzo's, but I was with Alliance for many years, so it was always kind of Marcelo's by default if I was in town. And then it's.
If you're in New York, I highly recommend Master Skya. Alex Eklund runs a great program. It's a great vibe. Okay. That's where
I know who he is. Yeah, I didn't realize his school.
Yeah, he's great. That's where my wife and I go train most of the time when we travel through New York.
Awesome.
So One of the other things I'm curious about is like you've got a huge variety of things that you've done in your life. And I like to be the same way. How do you think about success, right? Some people are like, oh, when I get my black belt, I'm going to be successful. It's like now you've got that. And so like what's your barometer for success?
Happiness. It's
that.
joy, man. It's joy. Like if I'm, you know, I get people in the Bitcoin space, especially because they're very like money focused, and they're like, Kurt's bitter because he's poor. And I'll be like, first of all, when have you ever seen me bitter? And like, second of all, I've been in Bitcoin for 12, like how poor could I be? Right. Like, but it's just such a toxic thing. And then I think they get ticked off because I'm happily married. I do all these other extracurricular things. I've got 3 kids, and like, for me, it's every day. And I work probably 60, 70 hours a week. I work a lot of hours, but it's interspersed with, I don't have a meeting for the next hour. Let's go to the park. And so I get to play with my kids. And that's something like if I was working 9 to 5 and commuting an hour each way, I wouldn't see my kids. And so we homeschool. And it allows me to help with their homework or help answer questions or even just spend an hour playing. I got a 5, a 3, and a 3-month-old. And so it's, yeah.
You got your hands full.
Don't sleep a lot. Yeah. but it's like I get to play Legos or I get to do whatever. And like, that's it. That's success. That is wealth, health, and happiness is, at least for me, it is being a father. It is being a happy husband and having a safe home, because that is not something that I grew up with. And to be that, just to give that to my family is like, that's almost all of my joy right there, is to just like, when I pop out of my office, it's like, Dad, and like, cool. Everything is great.
I love that. I wish more people kind of felt like that. Do you have any advice that you just kind of wish everybody knew? You know, anything you'd like to share with people?
I think a lot of happiness, it's a choice. I have dealt with a ton of nonsense and a ton of stuff that really, really sucked and really hurt. And there was a lot of stuff in my life that I had to cry about and deal with. And like, I've maintained a lot of friendships in my life for a very long time. I've friends that I've been friends with since grade school, and they're still my close friends. And I talked to one of them yesterday on the phone. We talked for an hour, and we've been friends since 3rd grade. And
that's kind of beautiful, actually. It's hard to maintain friendships deep into adulthood.
It is. And but again, it's a choice. Like we both, is not me, it was mutual that we both have pursued each other when, hey, we haven't talked for 3 months or whatever. Like it's time to call one another or whatever. And ultimately deciding to see the bright side and just find the joy in the situation. Not bury it. Don't bury your pain and let it bubble up and all of that. Like, process your pain, cry about it, go to therapy, go to jiu-jitsu, like all of that stuff. Like, that is good. But when it's done, once you've exercised it, you got to let it go too. Like, once you've gone all the way through your pain cycle and all that stuff, like, cool. I have kids that aren't traumatized, and it's my job to keep them not traumatized as much as I possibly can. And so and then it just ends. Like, the trauma goes away at a certain point because it becomes your job to facilitate love and joy and happiness and safety and all those things for the next group of people that you're with. And again, it's just a choice. And it's not an easy one at first, but it becomes easier and easier to just be happy, like genuinely happy, to not pretend to be happy and put on a stupid smile and all of that, but to really realize that, you know what, my life is good, and it is good that I'm alive, and I can keep getting better if I keep having a good attitude about it. So that's my advice. Choose happiness.
That sounds like a second order step of like, I needed to just go through jiu-jitsu. Like, I just needed to go through getting triggered. Like, I'm going to choose and like, now you're like, I'm going to choose happiness. So what are you excited about for the future?
Tons of stuff. I'm really excited for election season to be over because I can't stand it.
Yeah. American elections are crazy.
They're so annoying because they're divisive about all the stuff that we don't really even actually care about.
Yeah.
And, and it's like, I don't want to argue with my neighbor about whether or not a theoretical girl we don't know can have an abortion.
Yeah.
That is not a conversation me and you need to have or argue about or whatever. Like, neither of us have a daughter that's that age. We're not like, if you have a family member that's going through that, cool. I will talk about that with you, but I am not having a vague political conversation about it. And so election season being over, that's like 4 years apiece for me upcoming. Aside from that, man, it's just continuing to grow my stuff. I'm an entrepreneur probably by like programming at some deep, weird level, but like, I like my business is growing. I like seeing the stuff we accomplish and, our long-term plans. We got a bunch of good stuff on our plates. I got teams that are working. The economy's been pretty weird for a lot of people, but we've had a very good year and I'm really grateful for it. So I'm excited to get into 2025 and, honestly, I'm kind of excited for Halloween with the kids and like the holiday season, especially in Florida. I've only lived in Florida for about 3 years now. So it's weird not having the temperature and like the outdoor season tell me like it's time for the holidays. So it's a little bit like, oh, there's pumpkin decorations outside. It's still 90 degrees outside, but we're doing the holidays now. So like just that with the kids is so magical because I never really had that magic in my life, but to see the way that they feel about Halloween and Christmas and all those things, it's like, man, that's special. And so that's what I'm looking forward to in the near term.
That's great. I feel like I didn't want to go right into the next question, which was like, what do you want to promote? But because that was such a beautiful sentiment to like crush it with, okay, now put your stuff out there. But
there we go.
Go ahead,
back to business. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like follow me on social media. I'm Kurt Wuckert Jr. everywhere. So it's Instagram, X, Facebook, freaking Telegram, or like wherever else. Like I am Kurt Wuckert Jr. at everywhere.
I'm going to put all of this in the show notes as well, so there'll be links to it.
Cool. You can check out my mining company is gorillapool.com. You can check out my needs to be updated, but my like influencer site is kurtwuckertjr.com. Just reach out if you want to do business, if you want to get into the Bitcoin space, if you want to mine, you need somebody to consult on whether your company needs a blockchain for something. I do a lot of that. And then watch my stream. I do the CoinGeek Weekly live stream every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you catch it live, like you can ask me a question live. I'd be very happy to answer it. And we're syndicated everywhere. So
cool. Thanks so much for your time, Kurt. This was such a fun conversation.
Thank you, Eric. No, you run a good show. As somebody that's done it for a long time, it was a lot of fun to not talk about the same stuff I talk about all the time. So this has been great.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about Bitcoin, mining, or how to use the blockchain, feel free to reach out to Kurt. I'd also encourage everyone to check out some of his videos on YouTube. There's a lot of great information about him, his company, and his work on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency history. You can find his contact information and websites in the show notes. As always, thank you for your time and attention.